Hello, good evening. I have a big pleasure to have Mr. Dr. Randal Rauser as my person of interest, and he's a lovely person. I want to say that he does a lot of good works in the Christian land, just to say clearly.
It's good to be with you, Cyprian.
I I have a background. Yes. Sorry. Sorry. So what I want to right away say, even if you'll not like whatever we discussed this evening, please go to his channel and or his Twitter. He's more active there than on YouTube. Both are in the descriptions. But today the topic will be about a book in general, starting point. And this book matches me as an audience. So I was a doubter as a Baptist. He is a Baptist, so he can be very judgmental on this. Good on you. And right now I'm an atheist. So in both at two levels, these books addressed me, both as my past and my actual part. But my point is not to debate, say, hey, you have to choose atheism. That's not the point, but to discuss the themes and his insights on the topic. But before everything, I would say Dr. Randall could introduce himself as tentative apologist. And then
Sure.
we'll start.
Yeah, so I have a PhD from King's College London. I got that 23 years ago. I was a professor for 20 years. I started part-time doing workplace investigations 6 years ago, and I do that full-time now for the last little more than a year. And I've written 16 books in some broadly the areas that we're talking about today: theology, apologetics, worldview, and things like that. So it's good to be with you and your audience.
Thank you. So I will start with some personal story, but then I will go really to the book. So I will start with the doubting part first as a Baptist, and some part which I found it a bit different in the way you described in the section of doubting. But maybe you can comment that is a wrong description. So at least myself, I as a Baptist in Romania, we will not talk too much about creeds because they were associated with the Orthodox movement, and the Orthodox is very important. So we will not talk like even the Nicene Creed or Apostles' Creed, because maybe people will guess we have some tradition, and the tradition was a curse word, like you'll say liberal Christianity is a curse word or atheist is a curse word. So, but even then, there was some kind of creeds, implicit creeds, like Bible is without mistake, everything is written, Adam and Eve were literal, and so on. And at least for me, I remember the first doubt I had was about in Leviticus 11. It's about the clean and unclean animals, and there is a passage there that it says rabbits chew cud. Okay, so the rabbits are like cows, let's say so, or sheep and so on. And at least myself, having a background in family with PhD in biology, they said no, rabbits don't chew cud. Again, I'm not saying you should approve or disprove it, but anyway, I had these doubts with the backing of specialists in my family. And I noticed that I was asking, hey, my pastor, what do you think about it? And they gave to me apologetics. And the apologetics was more making the case worse. And one example of apologetics, again, I'm not saying this is how you'll defend it yourself, was that saying like, the rabbit eats twice the food, so this makes it unclean. It's basically a mistranslation. It means it eats twice the food. And what was bad about it is that if you say this is what makes it unclean, and this is what chewing cud means, the pork, the pig, sorry, not the pork, the pig would be clean animal because the pig eats twice. If you grow pigs, you'll go into that part. So again, I'm not saying this is a good or bad reasoning, but what I felt that quite often some apologetics miss the mark, but they were overly confident that they will blaster biologists and so on. And the first time when I've seen a good theology about it, it was a commentary. I think the book is named 70 Faces of Torah, if I remember right, the title. It's written by a rabbi. And it was saying that this was a commentary about, if I remember right, the Babylonian queen. She was seen as a rabbit. And this is a commentary about, hey, the Babylonian queen was unclean. It was not just the literalist view, it was just a commentary. But I want to say that this level of tradition and reinterpretation, it's more close to academical view, and I think many pastors learn kind of like this in seminary, but it was very silly that they will find some kind of excuses instead of saying, look, don't take the Bible, let's say, so literal, and try more, let's say, higher understanding of scripture. I don't know if it's the best wording, but I want to say that sometimes apologetics make things worse instead of not saying what it's in seminary. Again, I'm not saying I don't know what you learn in seminary. I've never been to a seminary. But what I want to say that I've seen in my face, like some apologetics makes it worse when you double check it, you feel lied again and again and again. And you'll not be able to match back with the scientists. I mean, the scientists, again, I'm not saying you should take them as gods or scientism. Do you think it's fair that many people have doubts like that in general, like Baptist? I was a Baptist, no creeds. We will go the creeds right away. But if you want, we can go strictly through the book. And also, it's not critical to me if the red is chew card, just to be very clear. It's just an illustration.
Okay, so I think we have to begin with, well, what's the big picture about how a Christian should think about the Bible? So 2 Timothy 3, Paul famously says, all scripture is God-breathed, theopneustos. And then he explains what he means by God-breathed. He says it's useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness to equip us for every good work. So what strikes me about that definition in 2 Timothy 3 is it's a very pragmatic definition, one that says the point of Scripture as being God-breathed or inspired is to equip us, to make us more like Jesus, to equip us for every good work. Unfortunately, some Christians, I think, have lost the plot. I will say they've lost the big picture. They've lost the forest for the trees. That means is that instead of focusing on that big picture, that the point of the Bible is to make us more like Jesus, to love God and love neighbor as ourselves. Rather, they get focused on thinking the point of theopneustos, or God-breathed, is that every single verse or passage in the Bible should somehow be affirmed in terms of whatever the original human author meant. So that when you come to a passage like talking about rabbits chewing their cud, and if that's what the original human author meant, well, then we as Christians are now obliged to think that, in fact, rabbits do chew their cud. And when we have scientific evidence that it's not, in fact, the case that rabbits chew cud, then this presents a significant problem or stumbling block for our Christian faith and our understanding of the authority and inspiration of the Bible. And I think that whole problem is created by this errant view that thinks you should affirm simply what every human author in the Bible says about every particular matter they might address, whether it's science and history, no less than theology and ethics. And that's, to me, mistaken. Rather, the beginning point of Scripture is to recognize that we come to all Scripture recognizing that it is to be read in a way that forms us to make us more like Jesus. So that if you read the Bible in a way that allows you to love God more faithfully and allows you to love your neighbor as yourself, that's a good guide, all things being equal, that you're reading it well. And if you're not reading the Bible in such a way that it increases your love of God or neighbor, then that is a good sign, all things being equal, that you're not reading the Bible well. So for me, the kind of dilemma you've described there, Cyprian, is just not one that would arise for me, because I don't look to the Bible or to particular verses in the Torah to understand things like botany and zoology and geology and other aspects of natural history and the world around us in terms of nature. I look to science to do that. That's not the point, and never was the point of the Bible. The Bible's point is to make us more like Jesus.
Thank you. You should talk to Baptists 35 years ago, at least in my circles, sadly, in Romania, and I'm sure there are still Baptists which have this view. But let's some specific types of Baptists. I know
let me just say one thing. That the view you described is not just a view among Baptists in Romania. It's very common in North America as well. And I think that in North America, as well as in Romania, this leads people to have crises of faith or find stumbling blocks in the most trivial things, like whether a rabbit chews its cud, rather than to focus on the big picture of Scripture and what it is purposed really to do, which is, again, to make us like Jesus. So I think the issue you raised is not an insignificant one, and it's not a provincial one that's limited to a part of Romania or Baptists in Romania. This is a big problem, and we really need to work to help people better understand how to understand and apply the Bible.
I agree. So let's go to the book, and later we will go for deeper questions with larger of your work. So I will start with the doubting part if you want, but if you want with atheists, it's fine too. I took some notes, and I will talk. So the most obvious one is the creeds. They differ by, one is basically copy pasted, and it has some ending with apostolic part. Spoiler alert, just to be very clear for people reading the book. But what I found it more interesting to me, it's maybe also because even when I was a Baptist, as I said to you, I was not too much challenged about the creeds for the reasons I just told you. Like you said about Apostolic Creed, which we will take later. But one part which you separated very interestingly is that how are the belief believer versus a diligent doubter. So, and to me, it reminds me of one author which I've seen I watched a few of your YouTube clips. It reminds me of Ingersoll's story about the salvation, if you know that story. So Ingersoll says a short story about a person saying, "Did you be? Do you believe that Eve, if I remember, it's out of your rib?" And the person said no. But were you a decent person? And that person said yes. And it's very nicely parallel saying, you are saying, what we're supposed to believe? You ask yourself in that definition paragraph, the belief believer, because I don't know, but I believe whatever it is. Say to me what I should believe, and I will believe it. That's, I think, some people take that chance, especially as they are afraid of being challenged. What if my salvation is attacked? What if my belonging is attacked? And later you compare it with the diligent doubter, which kind of, I personally myself found it quite useful as a position. Like you set the model of Trinity, we may put other subjects instead if people are very triggered about Trinity. But you said the person, like, he looks on the history of Trinity, he looks on the passages, and he doesn't find them convincing. Like, I personally think it's very hard to directly get Trinity. Maybe you can get very easy divinity of Jesus, but Trinity is quite complex theology. In even Christian, they sorted out after 300 years, 250, in my honest take. So Trinity is not quite obvious in the Bible. Do you think that doubt is a weakness? In fact, I personally think it's a strength of the faith. Like, again, I lost my faith as a doubter, but that's not related. For people listening or not listening, I lost it because of problem of suffering, my belief, but I was a doubter no matter what, with many things later. I just found more issues to doubt them. Don't you think that this is the part which I kind of, it's not a criticism, I just noticed that. To me, I think you also said it kind of, this is first of all natural, you can't decide what you doubt on. But I think this diligent doubter, I think is the best person to have it around. Like a theologian, and say, do you have a nice answer for everything? Will not want that answer. If a person has an answer for everything, basically I think has no answer for anything. What do you think about doubting in faith?
So let me start here, and then I'm going to make several points. The place I want to start is the heart for the whole conversation, I think, should be truth and the love of truth and the pursuit of truth. The question is, how do you get to truth? Well, one way people are going to assume, understandably, that you get to truth is through having right beliefs or true beliefs. That's one way to get to truth, yes. But arguably, I think another aspect of getting to truth is to be willing to question the beliefs that you have or doubt the beliefs that you have, because not all your beliefs are true. So doubt becomes a tool or a means to get to truth, the thing we value, no less than belief is a way to get to truth, the thing we value. Now, I think that we should talk about in this conversation, what is it to be a good person? When we talk about what it is to be a good person, well, many people, they'll think, of course, the first thing, maybe the only thing, is a good person is a person who lives in accord with moral virtue or embodies moral virtue rather than vice. So they have moral character, right? They have like empathy and love and compassion and justice and truthfulness and things like that. Moral or goodness, being a good person, also includes epistemic virtue, epistemic pertaining to belief and knowledge. So in other words, to be a good person also means to embody the characteristics of the pursuit of truth that include, yes, having true beliefs, but also being willing to question and doubt. Which brings me to a question. Is it better to believe the right thing for the wrong reason, or to believe the wrong thing for the right reason? Now, I'll say that again. Is it better to believe the right thing for the wrong reason, or to believe the wrong thing for the right reason? And what that question asks us is to distinguish which is more valuable ultimately, just to get the right belief or to have the right basis for holding the belief that you have. I'm not going to say absolutely it's one or the other, but I will say it's definitely includes having the right reasons. And that is where the doubter is at. So they want to make sure that we have the right reasons, not just that we have the right belief. And so they're questioning and they're doubting. Now, this brings me to these two different people that you raised, which I refer to in the book. So the blithe believer is a person who they might have the right belief, but they don't necessarily have it for the right reason. They just hold it because they've been told to believe it. Maybe they have a kind of epistemic lethargy. They're just kind of lazy when it comes to thinking hard about things. The other person comes in as the doubter, the diligent doubter. They might not have the right belief, but they want to make sure that whatever they do end up believing is for the right reason. And so they're doubting and they're questioning. They remind me of a fellow named Thomas More. Now, Thomas More worked closely with King Henry VIII. I believe he was chancellor in England in the late 1520s, early 1530s. But Thomas More was not what was becoming Anglicanism. He was a faithful Catholic. And so when he was required to give up his Catholic convictions and to become an Anglican when King Henry demanded it, he said, "I will not pin my conscience to another man's back." And as a result of following his convictions and refusing to become an Anglican, he ended up being executed. He gave his life for his convictions. And to me, this is something that's always stuck with me. I cannot pin my conscience to another man's back. If something seems wrong to me, if I find myself doubting it in my deepest core, then I'm not going to simply ignore those doubts and say, no, I'll just believe it and pretend I believe it. I'll become the blithe believer and not ask questions. On the contrary, because I want to be a good person who exhibits epistemic virtue no less than moral virtue, and who conditions their entire life on the pursuit of truth, I will not pin my conscience to another man's back. I will be that diligent voice of doubt within the community of faith.
It makes a lot of sense. And also, I think it builds in other way. I think even the Christian tradition, let's say the Thomas story, which we use it as an example of doubt. Like, I think this is more or less not too much in the Protestant view, the let's say Western view, but I want to use it this loosely. But I heard this view is more friendly for, I think, Armenian Church, like this, or Orthodox, but Oriental Orthodox, I think is the title. So this idea of doubt, it's sometimes it's really embraced, like the person is really embraced. And even Jesus, as far as we know in the John's passage, Jesus gives the proof. It tries to resolve that part, but it's accepted. It will not. Jesus didn't come to Thomas say, "How do you dare to doubt it?" I think it's you'll make another gospel out of it. So I'm saying even on the this right now I don't have that reading of the Bible, but even on this level, it looks to me it's wrong. Like there is a lot of Christian thinking about doubting, and you should embrace the doubter. Just probably it's not too much into sometimes when you get some parts as dogma. Basically, I would say like you can't doubt this, that, and that. And I think this is a weakness, at least from my side. Does it
So
help? Any comment? Would you comment on that?
I mean, I would just a couple big picture responses. So the word Israel, the word Israel was given to Jacob because he wrestled with the angel through the night. And because of that, he was given the name Israel, meaning he who wrestles or struggles with God. And then the church comes along, and the church, according to Paul in Romans 9, has been grafted into Israel. So the church has become part of what it is to be Israel. And I don't think often that Christians really grasp what this means. Because part of what it means to be willing to struggle with God, that is not a sign of a lack of faith. That is a sign of faith. That is evidence that you are being the very people God had purposed you as the church to be, those who struggle. Part of struggling is to have honest doubts and questions, to push back at things that seem wrong to you, to say, look, I don't know maybe even what the truth is, but I know it's not that. And to not always be willing just to go along with what everybody else says. Those voices should not be viewed as voices that should be silenced in the church. Rather, they should be heeded. They should be welcomed as part of the diversity of the body. People who embody what it is to be Israel by challenging the community around them through sharing of their own doubts and questions.
And I will say as a completion, I will go back to the Gospels. There are many people who we would agree they didn't have the right beliefs, even they were believers, and they interacted with Jesus. The Canaanite woman, the Samaritan woman, just to name a few. The Romans asking for uh, healing of their servants and so on, or daughter. I may get 50 tests wrong. Sorry, I didn't take notes for that. I didn't know. But I'm saying that even at this part, you will say that even that person had some doubts of their own faith, and they challenge them to get to Jesus. So you can't uh, get people to the truth without challenging it. And it's quite hypocritical to say, hey, if you are a Baptist, you can't doubt it. But if you are a Orthodox, the best is to doubt it as much as you reach Baptists or whatever. I'm using as an analogy. It sounds to me hypocritical, at least.
I mean, I would say, look, the Beatitudes, Jesus says, blessed are the poor, right? And then he goes off famously through this line, which is a total inversion of power and blessing and authority as we think about it in this world today. And this was a consistent teaching theme in Jesus' teaching, to overturn who we think is closest to God or who we think is right, who we think should be emulated, who we think is blessed. It's the same thing in the parable of the sheep and the goats. Those who are sheep and those who are goats in the parable are surprised to find out they are the people that they end up being identified as, right? They say, when did I do these things? As much as you did it to the least of these, my brothers, you did it unto me. And then in reverse, the goats said, did we not do these things? And Jesus, again, he condemns them, and they're surprised. What this says to me is now apply this to the way we think about belief and doubt and questions. The people who doubt may be within God's grammar, God's schema, God's model. These are the most blessed, because these are the people in some respects that are closest to him, because they are the ones that can perceive through the intimacy they have with him the very problems that others need to become aware of. And by having doubts and raising questions, they show their intimacy with God. And it's an inversion, again, of the values that we often think of when we think of intimacy and closeness and faith.
Would you want to clarify one question from the public about the Thomas More? So this question is in 2 steps. And I think the person, what he would say that that he is wrong, but that's my guess. Should I read it to you? Or
yeah, no, I read that. So he says that a couple things. Well, he says that he was believing blindly in the Roman Catholic Church. I don't think he was believing blindly. If you look at the history of Thomas More, he was a very highly intellectual person. If there's a general skepticism here about trust or fidelity to tradition, then yeah, that would exclude Thomas More. But I think that would be mistaken, because everybody has a tradition. You talked earlier.
You spoiled. I had the questions about that, but yes.
Well,
great.
yeah, I mean, you talked earlier, Cyprian, about your own Baptist background and the skepticism people had to tradition and to creeds. But the reality is, everybody has a tradition. We all have.
I had a section.
We all have traditions that were inculcated in or raised in. Nobody is a blank slate. Thomas More was no different. The commenter's no different either. But the other thing I would just say is this. Even if you disagree with Thomas More about something, I think I'm simply invoking Thomas More for a specific principle that I commend, that I think we ought to commend. That I cannot pin my conscience to another man's back. And what I would say is you can find the good in what a person says without agreeing with everything they said or with their entire life. So we shouldn't have a kind of all or nothing approach where we can only cite people or quote people if we agree with everything they've said and done.
Yes, I will go to the tradition, and I promise just to forget about this topic. I personally felt, again, the Baptists, especially 1990s, 2000, they had traditions. And I would say, probably you heard about these ones. You should not watch TV. Definitely Bible has nothing about TV. You should not be on the computer. And I was Olympic in computer science. And I say, how could I not touch a computer? It's like to be a musician, don't touch the violin, because it wastes too much time to not read the Bible. No matter how much I cared, and I read the Bible a few times to say so, these are incompatible actions and views, but even more on different levels, I've seen this kind of traditions. Very often when you say, we don't have saints we follow, we don't have Augustine, for example. Even at this level, I think it's wrong. At least the Baptists in Romania would read Spurgeon. They will use, like, I think he's not Baptist, but he is quoted, hey, you should read, I don't know if this person is Baptist.
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
Yes, there was this Case of Christ, Lee Strobel. You should read it because he's so influential, he's so clear. And I read the Lee Strobel Case for Christ, and I think it's a travesty of book. I understand why it's there, in the sense like people want affirmation. And I have a book. It's not your style of book. I'm not saying you should have that book, but at the same time, I was reading this book. I'm not sure if it's mirrored. Jesus, a Revolutionary Biography by Jean-Dominique Roussin. It's a very liberal book. But what it felt to me at the time, this was definitely not Baptist tradition, but it gave to me the worst case Christianity. And you could be still a Christian if you believe these things. This is a very historical. What I'm saying is the worst case Christianity is that John Dominic Roussin criticized many things which I'm 99% sure you will not agree with them. And but the parts which it looked like the person got it as honest as he could get. He will not embellish the facts he knew. I'm not saying he know all the facts, maybe you say sometimes he didn't get a charitable view, but he still remained a Christian devoted to Mary. He goes to pilgrimage. He's known for doing this. But to me, he looked a very honest person versus a kind of Lee Strobel or this kind of traditions, which is very often say you should read this, this, and that. That it gives you this kind of very rosy picture, but it sounds as the same as you listen about an Orthodox saint that he will do this miracle and that miracle, and when you got to pilgrimage there, all these wonders will happen, and they do not happen in reality. Again, this is not a criticism necessarily of the Lee Strobel book, but I've seen this reflected. If you reflect on it, there is this kind of background, Baptist background at least, that I was exposed with, and I can't say it's Christian thing. It felt to me at least.
Yeah. So I mean, the thing I find myself saying here with both Strobel and Crossan is there are things I appreciate about each and things that I don't appreciate about each. So for when it comes to Lee Strobel, he seems like a very genuine, pietistic, traditional evangelical. And I appreciate aspects of his work, including The Case for Christ. It's very readable. There's a lot of good information in it. It's also written from a particular evangelical perspective and approach to apologetics, which I have criticisms of and concerns about. And so I would certainly not give it an unqualified endorsement. And I've written another book on progressive Christianity, and I think he's been terrible when it comes to commenting on progressive Christianity, for example. When it comes to Crossan, I wouldn't, on the one hand, I wouldn't consider him an Orthodox Christian. I'm not sure. I know he was a Catholic priest early in his life. I'm not sure if he's agnostic or what, but I think he's like 90 years old now. Go ahead.
He's still Catholic.
He's still Catholic. Okay. Of course, he's made famous.
I would agree on Orthodox one. I would grant to that.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of his views about the resurrection of Jesus and so on. But look, he's nonetheless is a world-class biblical scholar, New Testament scholar, ancient historian of the first century. And there's all sorts of things to be gained from his work. And I think the reality is, whether it's Strobel or whether it's Crossan or anybody else, we always have to be careful about taking a very simple binary view, because very, very rarely is it the case where you're going to agree with everything or disagree with everything an author says, or that you'll be able to benefit from every single thing or find no benefit in anything.
In many places with Crossan. I simply said that the fact that it's just, at least this particular book, I have more, it slaps to you with many facts. And then he gives an interpretation quite very materialistic, I would say. So this one, I was disagreeing even as a Christian sometimes with them. But quite often the facts were not, I've got sugar-coated. And Lee Strobel, it's exactly the sugar-coat book. At least it felt to me when I read it last time. I think you know what I'm talking.
Yeah.
It looked.
I would just say everybody's got an angle. Everybody's got an agenda. Everybody has presuppositions. And so we shouldn't look for the authors to engage with who have no presupposition, because then we'll never read anything. We should rather just kind of try to become aware of the angle that they're coming from and where we might reasonably disagree with them. And I'll also say that, like, I've benefited, again, I want to say, from a lot of that Crossan has done, including his work on biblical violence, which has been an area in which I've done my own work. So, yeah, I certainly appreciate him, as well as Strobel, with each, again, with qualifications.
Great. So we forgot about tradition. We finished about it. Let's go with one part which I really appreciated a lot. I will go to atheist side right now, and we will read the creeds at the end. One part which I really notice and I appreciate is one of the most charitable views about atheism I could see in any Christian literature, Christian, especially evangelical literature. And I think you know what I'm talking about. And I will not use Lee Strobel again as an example. But if you especially talk about Frank Turek's, Greg Koppel, or things like that, you, not only being an atheist, even as a Christian, you can notice that atheists are not the same. And definitely they are not this kind of close-minded God haters, with a very simple, they can't explain morals and so on. This was really amazing to me in the reading of the book, and one of the listeners right now, sadly, just one put his name, Claudio, but he will get that book if not. One part which I really appreciate is this, I would say, realistic view. And also, I know you have a book about God loves atheists, and you started with a parallel Samaritan story. So, what makes you? I don't know. Why did you allocate? I think more than anything about Christianity, just about describing properly kind of atheism. Like they had, you go with object morals, with various levels of doubt. You talk about materialistic and supernatural atheism. I think I would say this is more describing atheists, or let's say strictly non-believers, to a Christian audience. This, I think, it's extraordinary in my view, at least as content, as percentage of the book. You understand, without reading a philosophy book, what makes you go into that angle? And of course, there is very powerful Rwanda side about the genocide, which talks about uh, also epistemic validity, the Miambe. So, what makes you really use so much space for atheists if in the book? I'm really curious. And why do you describe it as you describe it?
I mean, we live in an age of increasing polarization where people target and otherize different groups, dehumanize them, and then they create everything that's wrong with those groups. And one of the groups that's faced a lot of prejudice in North American society and in other parts of the world for sure are atheists. And this is not just contemporary, but in my book, Is the Atheist My Neighbor, I talk about the history of misatheism. So the term from Greek, mis is a prefix, or miso, which means hatred of something. So misanthropy is hatred of humanity, for example. Misogyny is hatred of women. And misatheism would be hatred of atheists or suspicion of atheists. And there's a lot of that throughout history. And in that book, Is the Atheist My Neighbor, I give multiple examples. You mentioned Spurgeon, for example. So Spurgeon, in his Treasury of David, a collection of commentary on the Psalms from the 19th century, he talks about how atheists are worse than the most despicable brute. He tells a story about how an atheist, he quotes Joseph Addison talking about how they discovered an atheist was on their boat when they were at sea and they wanted to throw the atheist overboard. And it's shared as a funny story where, because the atheist is the worst kind of human being you could imagine, so bad that you could joke about drowning that person at sea. And then he says the atheists are worse than devils because devils believe in God, according to James 2:19, but atheists don't believe in God. When you have that kind of language of dehumanizing and hating other people, well, that can get into things, including what you referenced, is genocide. You can justify doing anything against people once you've devalued them to that point. So I talked earlier, big picture, about what is Christianity about, and it's about love of God and neighbor to become more like Jesus. For a Christian, the atheist is your neighbor. This is not a person that you should be objectifying, dehumanizing. This is a person you should be loving as yourself and treating the way that you would want to be treated. And part of the way that you should be treating other people is to treat their beliefs with the nuance and dignity that you would want your beliefs to be treated with. And what that means, for among other things, is go up to people. Don't assume you know what they believe. Ask them what they believe. Ask them to explain and unpack their understanding of the world for you, and then try to understand that at least as well as they understand it, rather than to try to just objectify, dismiss, and defeat them. And that will do an enormous service, not only to the love of neighbor, but then be benefit to yourself, because you will understand better where truth at points may lie outside of what you currently believe. And you may be challenged to change your own beliefs because of the conversation you, let's say Cyprian as an atheist, had with a Christian, or that I as a Christian had with an atheist.
Right. And one part which I especially appreciated, and I had, in fact, I will around 1 month ago, I had a discussion with a Lutheran pastor, and he gave to me a book of William Lane Craig about philosophy. And it's this thing, and I think it's foundational philosophy of Christianity. And there was a criticism about morality, which you very nicely describe it. It was basically criticizing, again, the atheists basically have no morals. And what they said, they are relative. They are utilitarian, but the utilitarians are so confused with token utilitarianism. I forgot the other one, rule-based utilitarianism. And again, with me, my first objection I felt when a person think like that, he was saying in comparison that Christianity has this objective morals. I think any question I get asked about anything, could a woman preach? And I don't want you to give this answer. If a woman can preach, and not like physically can, but might preach, is allowed to preach. You understand? Let's be very clear in that topic too. My first experience is that believers say 10 answers. Really, every believer says its own answer, including yourself, and I appreciate that. And I personally, it felt to me quite often, even in the books that are supposedly addressing pastors. So this he learned it in his seminary, Lutheran. I will not quote. I will not find for you which seminary he did, but is that this view that atheists are kind of this blunt, very limited view, kind of nihilists, or they kind of try to juggle morals just to find a solution. And it was really also refreshing to show, look, atheists believe in objective morals. And you describe Waldenberg, I forgot his exact name, Waldenberg. Well, you know his name, maybe better than me. I'll have to look in the book.
There is like Schellenberg or Dworkin, one of those philosophers I refer to?
Yes. So there are definitely atheists which believe in objective morals, and they go from the Platonic views, and this is standard. There are atheists which are supernatural atheists. Also, yes. So this is also, to me, it was very refreshing. Like many people think that atheists, like you said, you can throw it. He doesn't know what is good, what is bad, or something like that. This was also very charitable, and I appreciated that. To me, also, it was really amazing because atheists, you were granting, like, even they are wrong, you were setting this story of the Rwandan genocide, and maybe you can describe it about Elisa Pam Nutka. Sorry, the name is very hard to me. Sure. I know you know it.
Okay, I can share that story and the point that I'm making there. So in 1994, between April and June of 1994, the most efficient genocide of the 20th century erupted and was carried out in the Central African country of Rwanda. And there was between two different historic ethnic groups. And it's a bit of an aside to the story, but those groups were really creations of the Belgian colonizers, who said people who had certain features within the country, certain physical features, should be viewed as Tutus or Hutus, and the other ones as Tutsis. And the Tutsis had a long history of, because they looked more Caucasian, they had a long history of having a sort of elevated status within Rwandan society, but they were also very much and are very much the minority in the population. And that built up a lot of resentment among the Hutus, who were the majority and looked less Caucasian, against the Tutsis. And this had been bubbling as tension for years, and it really erupted in April of 1994 with the Hutus undertaking what was going to become the most efficient genocide, which led to the close contact killing with scythes and other machetes of the Tutsi population to the extent of more than 800,000 people in 3 months. Men, women, children, infants, there was no discrimination. It was everyone. And just massive killing. So the most heinous war crimes not the most heinous crimes against humanity one can imagine were carried out in Rwanda between April and July of 1994. And now coming out of that, these are two of the stories of how different people responded. One of these people, his name was Elzefan Nikatarama, and he himself was a Tutsi. He looked more Caucasian. So he had, he looked less Caucasian. He was a Hutu. So he was part of the class carrying out the genocide. So he was not himself under threat. But many of his congregants were Tutsis who were under threat because they were being targeted and they were hiding. And they reached out to him, Nikutarama, and they said, please save us. Here's where we're hiding, in this place called the Minegro complex. Instead of helping his people escape as a shepherd to his sheep in his church, he sent in the militias to kill them. And so these people were massacred. So that's how the Christian Hutu pastor responded to the genocide. The second person is a fellow named Mabai Diagne. Mabai Diagne was working with the United Nations peacekeeping forces in Rwanda at the time, who were woefully under-equipped to deal with the unfolding genocide, but he did what he could. They were stationed in what it was colloquially known as Hotel Rwanda in Kigali. And every day he would venture out from the hotel compound where there was relative safety in his Land Rover, wearing his light blue United Nations beret. And he had boxes of cigarettes, and he would drive around and find Tutsis come out who, when they saw him coming, looking for help, and he would get them to get into his vehicle, and then he would drive back toward the complex, toward the hotel. But he would have to drive through these various checkpoints along the way, where there would be Hutus with machetes and guns who would be threatening to kill him and the people in the car. And he would use cigarettes to bargain with them to drive through the checkpoints and eventually get back to the hotel and save the lives of these people. And he did this day after day until he was finally killed by shrapnel in mid-May of 1994. In the process, he saved maybe 80 to 90 people in his Jeep. Now, I ask people this. If you're a Christian, think about this. You're going to stand before the throne of God, and you can have the life and legacy of one of these two people. The first was a Christian pastor who helped carry out a genocide. The second, in the case of Mabai Diagne, he was a Muslim. So he believed the wrong things, according to Christian doctrine, but he lived his life selflessly for the neighbor and gave his life as Jesus gave his life, trying to save people. Which would you rather be of those two standing before the throne of God? The Christian who carried out genocide, or the Muslim who loved his neighbor and gave his life for his neighbor? Now, I'm going to say at the very least, I've asked this question to countless people, and I've never had anybody say, I would rather be the Christian pastor who carried out genocide. Some people refuse to answer the question, but I think that's just avoiding what is standing before us, which is the most important thing. Not that belief is unimportant, but the most important thing is how you live your life. And so at the heart of the Doubter's Creed really is to invite us all in a common project to ask this question: how are you living your life? Are you living your life in the love of neighbor and for the love of neighbor? And if so, whatever your further beliefs are, you are already, from a Christian perspective, some way very significantly on the journey to truth.
I agree, and I can even read the creeds. I have them in front of me. And one part which I want to double it in that I personally think that many atheists, they define themselves humanists, and even myself as a utilitarian, I don't think people should be dismembered or something like that. I really, definitely in your legacy case, I'm on the Muslim side. I'm not a Muslim. I'm not for Muslim in any case, to be very clear. But I personally think this is, as you said, this is the right thing to do. And it's a right thing to do as a utilitarian side. Is it worth one person to die for 90 or 80%, which are sons, daughters, brothers, you understand, kids of someone that will see the next day? And I'll say yes, even as a utilitarian. And I really agree, not only because of your take about Jesus, and I also think like to me one passage, I will talk about theology without being a theologian, is the Matthew 25. The single thing which Jesus says how you'll be saved is that people who say, didn't we do this thing, didn't we believe, they probably believe the right things. This is why they felt they have the Holy Ghost that could do these healings or these miracles. Again, this is my interpretation. And what is to me the most surprising part is that the people who are saved, they say, when did we do these things? And the belief in particular is not there for the saved people. The unsaved ones are there with belief. They definitely believe they did the Jesus work. So even at this, again, me reinterpreting maybe too much, but it felt to me that even Jesus gives to you this obvious point. You should feed the hungry person. You should give water if it's thirsty. You should visit when it's alone in the jail.
So I can't hear
And
you, Cyprian. You cut out.
sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Can you hear me now?
I just heard you say Jesus. Can you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Well, listen, I've only got 4 minutes left. How about I just give a quick response based upon that?
Please, and I say also the creed, or basically, I believe in God, in Father Almighty. This is the Apostles' Creed, but I believe in Jesus as model examples of life and goodness and love, and I try to emulate by loving my neighbor as myself. And I still believe in absolute source of God, goodness, meaning of human flourishing, and let me call it God. I'll stop here, but I'll let you finish, please.
Okay, so yeah, so I couldn't hear the last piece, the last minute or so, but I'll just give a quick response and then I'll have to end. But yeah, I mean, I referenced Matthew 25 earlier as well. Like I mean, I think that one thing I would want to say, sometimes Christians say, "Oh, are you saying that this is works righteousness, that you're saved because of the things you've done?" No, not at all. What we're saying is the evidence, the fruit that one is living in accord with love, light, and truth and goodness is that one is producing the fruit of loving one's neighbor. So I think what Jesus is saying in Matthew 25 is if you want to see evidence that people are living in accord with ultimate reality, whatever that is, I understand it to be a personal God, you do not. But if you're living in accord with that, you're going to produce the fruit consistent with that. And that will be, among other things, loving your neighbor as yourself and bringing light and truth and goodness to the world. And we may have all sorts of different beliefs. You're a utilitarian. I mean, I'll just say as a brief sidebar, I'm not a utilitarian as an overarching moral ethical framework. And I think there are weaknesses, but there are also strengths in utilitarianism. And as a virtue theorist, someone who is probably closer, well, certainly to virtue theory, but also to a deontological framework, nonetheless, there are aspects where I would use and utilize and benefit from a utilitarian framework. So again, we need to get beyond the kind of absolutes of you got to agree with me on everything or I can't learn from you on anything, because that's just not helpful, especially in our highly polarized world. We need to come together and recognize that we are on a common project of pursuit of truth with a capital T, of goodness. I'm going to call it God. You may have another name for it, but we can find ourselves 90% of the way there often if we begin to search for common ground rather than to search for divides and disagreements. So I want to thank you very much, Cyprian. It's been a delight to be with you and your audience today, and hopefully it's been a benefit to people.
I thank you a lot, and I will gift the book to one of our listeners.
I still can't hear you, but
that's sad. Thank you.
All right, take care. We'll see you.
See you. Bye bye. So, deci pentru cei care mă auziți, Claudiu, felicitări pentru carte. Te rog să mă contactezi dacă mai ai pe Facebook, în mod privat, și am să-ți dau la adresa care îmi dai cartea. Și mă bucur pentru toți care m-ați ascultat și ne vedem data viitoare. Dacă mai este o ultimă întrebare, am să pot răspunde, dar numele dumnealui, dacă este posibil. Ok. Nu văd nicio întrebare. Deci, data viitoare. Bine. Pa, pa!